Dear listener, welcome to this calm and unhurried journey through history here on the Histovale channel. We sincerely hope you are finding full rest in this late hour of the night. Now, let us enter that quiet chapter of history. The spring of 1775 was a season of profound, quiet terror for the wealthy merchants of colonial New England. The siege of Boston was tightening, the air was heavy with the inevitability of full-scale war, and the shadow of British confiscation hung over the entire economic infrastructure of the burgeoning revolution. This was a moment not of grand military strategy, but of meticulous, deeply secretive financial engineering, a frantic effort to mobilize liquid wealth and sensitive documentation away from the reach of the king's customs agents and the British Army. This period saw the rise of the committees of safety, ad hoc, clandestine governing bodies established across the colonies to manage logistics, intelligence, and, most critically, capital protection. To the public, these committees coordinated troop movements and collected powder, but to the inner circle of the wealthiest patriots, they managed the unregistered cargo, the true untouchable war chest that financed the Revolution's early, desperate years. The problem of visibility and vulnerability. The merchant families of Boston, Salem, and Portsmouth held their assets primarily in physical forms: gold specie, silver bullion, promissory notes, European bonds, and title deeds to vast land holdings. Moving this wealth was a monumental security risk. British forces controlled the main roads and the major ports. Any large visible transport of treasure would be instantly seized as treasonous material. The strategy, therefore, was founded on two pillars: segmentation and obscurity. The committees realized the wealth had to be broken into manageable smaller segments and hidden within the mundane, continuous flow of legitimate coastal commerce. The immediate goal was to transfer the most critical assets, the gold and the financial ledgers, from the vulnerable centralized Boston banking houses to secure, decentralized locations along the rugged, sparsely populated New England coastline. The unmarked transfer, hiding in plain sight. The gold was never transported in smart strongboxes. It was disguised with a deliberate, frustrating banality. Agricultural disguise. Gold specie and silver bars were melted down and reformed into crude, unmarked lead ingots or poured into ceramic jars disguised as household lard or tallow. These were then packed into ordinary wooden crates bearing generic stencils like farming supplies or provisions. The unregistered cargo. The true genius lay in the documentation. Every merchant vessel leaving the besieged ports had an official, rigorously audited manifest for British inspection, detailing common trade goods, salted fish, rum, lumber, and ironware. The gold, however, was recorded only in a parallel, secret ledger, the unregistered cargo log, maintained exclusively by the committees of safety. This cargo literally did not exist on paper for the Crown. The most valuable items were not the gold itself, but the paper trail, the signed contracts, the bills of exchange, and the specialized private nautical almanacs that would later form the basis of the encryption. These papers were often sewn into the lining of old sailors' coats or hidden within the hollowed-out bulkheads of the vessels themselves. The role of the committees of safety. The committees served as the ultimate logistical and intelligence filter. Their network of loyalists included ship captains, dock workers, and customs agents who remained secretly sympathetic to the Patriot cause. Vessel selection. They hand-picked small, fast schooners, often commanded by captains with deep, intimate knowledge of the treacherous New England coast, favoring the narrow, shallow waterways over the open sea. Timing and tides. The transfers were always coordinated during the absolute quiet of the pre-dawn hours or during periods of thick sea fog, moments when visibility was at its lowest and the vigilance of the British Navy was naturally dulled. The movement was slow, deliberate, and always dictated by the tides, a theme that would become crucial to the ultimate concealment. The double-blind system. The merchant providing the wealth rarely knew the destination, and the final recipient rarely knew the source. Only a single, dedicated cryptographer auditor, managed directly by the Central Committee leadership, held the complete, terrifying map of the wealth's segmented journey. The unregistered cargo was successfully distributed along the coastline, moving inland via rivers, concealed on small fishing dories, and ultimately finding temporary rest in the secluded salt marshes and isolated coves that define the New England periphery. The success of the evacuation established the necessary financial foundation for the American Revolution, but the gold was still exposed. The next critical step, the creation of an unbreakable future-proof cipher for its permanent concealment, would fall to the single quiet scholar who understood the silent language of the stars. The true history of the fortune now shifts from the chaos of war to the abstract, cold geometry of the cosmos. The successful physical removal of the unregistered cargo from British-controlled ports was merely the first phase of its protection. The greater challenge, addressed by the Committees of Safety, was the long-term, future-proof security of the assets. As the Revolutionary War progressed and the financial necessity of the reserve grew, the knowledge of its fragmented locations became a critical vulnerability. Any captured loyalist or compromised ledger could expose the entire hidden treasury. The solution lay not with military engineers or cartographers, but with a lone scholar possessing an almost obsessive grasp of celestial mechanics, Dr. Silas Thorne, the self-styled almanac cryptographer. Thorne was a brilliant mathematician from Massachusetts, known for his annual predictions of tidal shifts and astronomical events, knowledge invaluable to New England commerce. The committees entrusted him with the most profound task, transforming physical coordinates into an unbreakable, time-locked celestial cipher. The principle of unstealable coordinates. Dr. Thorne understood that conventional maps, even coded ones, were vulnerable to discovery. A paper map could be burned, stolen, or deciphered by standard military cryptography. He needed coordinates that were immutable, universal, and non-terrestrial, a cipher where the key resided in the sky itself. His method was based on exploiting the unique characteristics of the 18th century mariner's essential tool, the nautical almanac. The almanac contained vast tables of predicted celestial data, the exact declination, vertical angle, and right ascension, horizontal angle, of key stars, the moon, and the sun, specifically calculated for the Greenwich prime meridian. Thorne realized that by recording the gold's location not using latitude and longitude, but by using specific astronomical sightings referenced against the almanac's tables, he could create a map that was unintelligible to anyone without the original almanac copy and his proprietary calculation key. The code of the North Star, the two-point fix. Thorne's cipher, the code of the North Star, was a complex two-point system designed to define the exact concealment location. The declination cipher, vertical fix. The latitude of the deposit site was encoded using the declination of Polaris, the North Star, on a specific, non-obvious date. The entry in Thorne's private logbook would read, for example, Polaris, 45 degrees 12 minutes 35 seconds declination on new moon of August 1777. This numerical value, when subtracted from the almanac's published declination for that date and multiplied by a secret scalar, for example, the captain's age, 42, yielded the true latitude. Only someone with the original published almanac from 1777 and Thorne's personal calculation key could derive the latitude. The lunar cipher, horizontal fix. The longitude was far more complex. It was encoded using the precise horizontal angular distance between the moon and a known fixed star, often Regulus or Aldebaran, at midnight on a specific day. This method, known as a lunar distance calculation, was the standard method of determining longitude at sea. Thorne recorded the error in this calculation for a specific time and date, and that error, when applied to a known coastal landmark, yielded the true longitude. The resulting cipher entry was a dense series of numbers and astronomical abbreviations that looked, to the untrained eye, like a failed or corrupted entry from a routine naval log. The true map of the gold reserve was disguised as bureaucratic incompetence. The Almanac Auditor's Ledger. Thorne's Almanac Auditor's Ledger was his single, fragile key to the entire operation. Bound in oiled canvas and filled with his elegant, tiny mathematical script, it recorded the location identifier, a simple number for each segmented gold deposit, the almanac year used for calculation, 1775, 1776, or 1777, the secret scalar, the key multiplier for the declination cipher, and the lunar error factor needed to resolve the longitude. This ledger was the repository of the revolution's financial existence. If it were captured, the entire war chest would be revealed. Recognizing this, Thorne never kept the full ledger in one place. He utilized segmentation again. The physical ledger only recorded the location identifiers and the almanac year. The scalar and error factors were hidden in 4 different physical locations, 2 tucked into family Bibles in different states, and 2 sewn into the bindings of obscure, massive legal texts. The Code of the North Star ensured that the wealth was not just hidden physically, but mathematically. The treasure was guarded by the constant, cold geometry of the cosmos, requiring not courage or force to find, but the quiet, intellectual discipline of an astronomer. The next vital step would be to link these celestial coordinates to the chaotic, unstable geography of the New England coast, using the most unpredictable force of nature, the tide.
Dr. Silas Thorne's Code of the North Star successfully translated the physical location of the partitioned gold reserves into an unassailable celestial cipher. However, the coordinates derived from the Almanac Auditor's Ledger were abstract, latitudes and longitudes. They still needed to be linked to a precise, verifiable, and permanent landmark on the ground, especially one that the British would overlook. This required the final, most brilliant layer of the concealment strategy, the cartography of the tide. The traditional choice for concealment, a mountain cave, a stone vault, or a deep well, offered permanence but lacked true anonymity. These sites were too obvious, too easily cataloged by colonial surveys. The committees of safety, through Thorne, chose the absolute antithesis of stability, the salt marshes of coastal New England. The strategic value of the unstable shoreline. The salt marshes were ideal for the committee's purpose for 3 critical reasons. Impenetrability. The dense root systems, soft, treacherous mud, and shifting water levels made the marshes hostile to all but the most local inhabitants. They were areas of neglect, rarely surveyed, and impossible for military units to navigate or search systematically. Lack of fixed landmarks. Unlike rocky coasts, the marshes lacked permanent reference points. Banks eroded, streams shifted, and vegetation died and regrew rapidly. This necessitated a form of mapping that transcended fixed geography. Tidal camouflage. The daily cycle of the tide ensured that the concealment sites were submerged and covered by water and silt for hours every day, making any disturbance invisible and rendering the land unapproachable for long periods. The challenge for Thorne was to map a location defined by instability. He needed a coordinate system that was not merely on the coast, but intrinsically linked to the rhythm and fluid geometry of the ocean. The tidal datum cipher. Thorne's cartography of the tide was an additional layer of numerical security added to his celestial cipher. It served as the precise final approach vector, translating the abstract astronomical coordinate into a physical, accessible point within the vast, monotonous marshland. The key lay in the concept of the tidal datum, the specific elevation of the water relative to the land at a given time. The high tide elevation fix. The longitude derived from the lunar cipher was only the start. To pinpoint the exact burial site, Thorne logged the exact elevation of the water during the spring tide, highest tide, on the specific date the gold segment was deposited. It was measured from a known permanent rock outcropping far from the marsh and recorded in his ledger as a specific depth in inches. Example entry: Site 3, tidal datum equals 47 inches, 2 hours post-peak. The time shift coordinate. The location of the burial site relative to the marsh entrance was encoded using the time it took for the tide to fully recede from the spot, again referenced against the nautical almanac's predicted time. This number was a distance. A longer recession time meant a location deeper within the marsh where the water lingered. To find the gold, a future searcher would not only need the celestial coordinates, but would also need to physically return to the marsh, consult the original 18th century almanac's tidal predictions, and measure the water elevation at the exact moment recorded in the ledger. If the measurement was off by a single inch or the time off by a minute, the coordinates would fail. The unreliability of the mud. Thorne's choice of the marsh was a calculated risk that ensured the secret's longevity. The concealment sites were often temporary mud islands or the submerged banks of minor shifting creeks. The gold was deliberately placed beneath the anaerobic layer of the marsh, where the highly acidic environment and lack of oxygen would quickly destroy any organic material, wood, cloth, or simple paper wrappers, but would leave the gold and the unique thick-walled lead ingot disguise intact. This system guaranteed that after even a decade, the mud would completely consume any surface evidence. The only things remaining would be the astronomical cipher, the tidal calculation, and the structure, the subject of the next phase, that contained the wealth. The cartography of the tide proved that the greatest protection for the Revolution's assets was not a fort or a sentinel, but the vast, silent, and frustratingly complex natural processes of the New England coastline. The next layer of the mystery delves into the physical structures built into this unstable ground to house the unregistered cargo, structures that were equally designed to be ignored.
The celestial coordinates and tidal measurements derived from the almanac cryptographer's method successfully pinpointed the exact submerged locations within the treacherous New England salt marshes. However, the marsh mud, while providing unparalleled camouflage, offered no structural protection against the corrosive elements or the gradual, relentless sinking of heavy objects. The gold needed a silent, permanent sanctuary, a vault that was both structurally sound and perfectly integrated into the region's agricultural anonymity. The solution, devised by the committees of safety and executed by local stonemasons loyal to the patriot cause, was a masterpiece of architectural deceit. The utilization of ancient, unused stone silos and subterranean food cellars, structures whose geometry was immediately recognizable as mundane farm infrastructure, yet whose function had been entirely repurposed to serve as the Revolution's secret underground treasury. The decoy of the farmstead. The chosen concealment sites were often located on the periphery of established yet isolated New England farmsteads. These farms were owned by patriot families who faced constant, quiet harassment from British raiding parties. The farmstead itself served as the decoy of the mundane. A military patrol searching for treason would be looking for military materiel or prominent persons. They would never suspect the modest, rustic farm buildings. The gold was not hidden in the farmhouse, but beneath it or adjacent to it, within structures designed for long-term food preservation. The root cellars. Many old colonial farms possessed deep stone-lined root cellars designed to keep produce cool and dry through the winter. These cellars offered robust stone walls and an already excavated cavity. The stone masons simply sealed off a lower chamber of the cellar, reinforcing the roof with slate and placing the entrance under a heavy, immovable grindstone or well cover. The disused silos. The most robust vaults were constructed within or directly beneath ancient, disused stone grain silos. These silos, tall, circular stone towers, were a common feature on larger farms. Their visible geometry suggested agrarian storage, while their internal structure offered thick, defensive walls. The geometry of the vault. The true security lay in the specific geometry of the silo's vault rooms, built deep beneath the marsh-adjacent land. The cylindrical principle. The internal vaults were often cylindrical, mirroring the shape of the silo above. This geometry offered exceptional resistance to the lateral pressure of the surrounding earth and water-saturated soil. While a square room might collapse under the pressure of the mud, the circular walls distributed the force evenly. The inverted cone floor. The floor of the vault was not flat. It was constructed as a shallow, inverted stone cone, sloping slightly towards the center. This design was crucial for drainage. It ensured that any groundwater that seeped in would pool in the middle, allowing the bulk of the valuable crates, placed on raised slate platforms around the periphery, to remain relatively dry. The depth and anaerobic layer. The vaults were sunk to a depth specifically calculated to be below the natural frost line, and more importantly, below the aerobic layer of the soil. This guaranteed a cool, stable temperature and, in the event of major flooding, an anaerobic environment similar to the marsh itself, which would inhibit the degradation of the gold's protective casings. The stone masons used the same local fieldstone and mortar as the rest of the farm buildings, ensuring the structure's camouflage was geological as well as visual. No metal fittings were used near the surface entrance that might attract early primitive metal detectors. The only metal was the gold itself, sealed away in the silent, cylindrical heart of the earth. The geometry of the sealed entrance. The final security measure involved the entrance, which was designed to be permanently lost. The entry shafts were filled with layers of sediment and common farm refuse, broken tools, stones, discarded metal, until the vertical shaft appeared to be nothing more than a shallow, disused drainage pit or a collapsed septic cover. The final resting place of the gold was often located within the dead center of the farmstead's footprint of neglect. Areas such as abandoned livestock pens, overgrown garden plots, were the aforementioned disused silos that drew no attention. The geometry of the silos' vaults ensured that even if a future explorer found the marsh location via the tidal cipher, they would still need the final, non-celestial key, the understanding that the hidden vault was not a newly dug hole, but an ancient, disguised structure integrated into the regional agricultural anonymity. The gold was safe, protected by the very foundations of colonial life, boring, durable, and utterly unremarkable. This elaborate system completed the full concealment cycle, leaving the wealth secure against military action and future discovery. Now the story moves to the long aftermath, the enduring legal and economic silence that continues to protect this hidden fortune.
The meticulous concealment of the New England merchants' assets, secured by the geometry of the silos, ciphered by the code of the North Star, and placed within the treachery of the salt marshes, marked the end of the physical operation. Yet, the final, most profound layer of protection for this colossal fortune was not stone or star, but the enduring, quiet action of the law and the financial market itself. This silent guardianship created the coastal null, a permanent state of legal and economic vacuum that renders the wealth essentially unclaimable, even today. The forgotten wealth of the Committees of Safety was designed to finance the nascent United States. Ironically, the very stability of the new republic ensured that the wealth would remain undisturbed. The problem of claim and sovereignty. Once the American Revolution was successfully concluded, the gold reserve was no longer needed as emergency specie. The newly established American Treasury was financed through fresh foreign loans, taxation, and the sale of public lands. The original purpose of the hidden gold, to pay mercenary armies or sustain a government in exile, had vanished. The legal status of the wealth immediately entered a state of irreversible ambiguity. Sovereign ambiguity. The gold was held by the Committees of Safety, which were quasi-governmental, ad hoc entities that dissolved immediately after the war. There was no direct legal successor or corporation to claim the assets. It was money belonging to a political body that simply ceased to exist. The absence of a ledger. Dr. Thorne, the almanac cryptographer, died before the war's end, having only partially transferred the knowledge of his celestial key. The physical almanac auditor's ledgers survived, but the final secret scalar keys, hidden in multiple places, were lost to history. Without the complete cipher, the coordinates were unusable. The wealth became legally inaccessible, guarded by a mathematical barrier. This situation created the coastal null, a massive asset that existed physically, deep within the silos, but was legally non-existent because no living entity could prove definitive ownership or locate it with the necessary precision to withstand judicial scrutiny. The insurance and banking silence. The financial establishment of the 19th century quickly adapted to the Great Silence surrounding the Revolutionary War's secret assets. Unlike the Titanic disaster, where the loss was sudden and clear, the wealth of the committees simply failed to reappear. Insurance underwriters and emerging American banks treated the assets not as lost or stolen, but as permanently non-transferable. They engaged in a silent, coordinated effort of financial stabilization, write-off and recalculation. The promissory notes, bonds, and bills of exchange that represented the hidden wealth were eventually written off against the pre-revolutionary British colonial debt. This accounting maneuver effectively used the hidden wealth to stabilize the early republic's credit without ever physically touching the gold. The value was absorbed into the national balance sheet as a theoretical gain, but the physical gold remained dormant. Discouraging inquiry. The powerful merchants who survived the war and who knew of the treasure, if not its location, had no incentive to retrieve it. Retrieving the gold would destabilize the fragile post-war economy and invite complex, ruinous legal challenges from the surviving descendants of all the original investors. The enduring calm of the coastal communities was therefore an intentional consensus.
The past must remain silent for the future to thrive. The geological guardianship. Today, the swampland vaults remain the perfect natural sentinels. The sites are now part of protected coastal wetlands governed by environmental laws and conservation efforts that forbid intrusive digging or extensive excavation. The geometry of the silos, sunk into the acidic anaerobic environment of the salt marsh, offers geological preservation that is rivaled only by the deep ocean. The gold, sealed in its inert stone chambers, is shielded from the elements. Furthermore, modern geophysical survey methods like ground-penetrating radar struggle to penetrate the highly saturated, electrically conductive environment of the marsh mud, especially when targeting structures made of local stone rather than foreign metal. The forgotten wealth is protected by a multi-layered shield. Layer 1, physical, salt marsh mud and water. Layer 2, architectural, the local stone construction of the silos. Layer 3, mathematical, the unsolvable almanac cryptographer's key. Layer 4, legal, the coastal null, the absence of a legal claimant. The grand total of this fortune remains in the silent earth, a perpetual, unclaimable legacy of the American founding. It is a story whose conclusion lies not in a heroic discovery, but in the quiet, absolute triumph of bureaucracy and financial pragmatism over the chaos of war. The true wealth of the Revolution lies buried beneath the tidal flow, forever safe in the enduring calm of the New England coast.
This long and detailed discussion of American history slowly comes to an end right here. We hope that this quiet narration has helped your mind find rest and has made your sleep even deeper and more comfortable. To listen to another dull yet important chapter from the pages of history on a future night, you may follow the channel. May every one of your nights be tranquil and restful. Good night.